Good morning. You're watching Bare Knuckle Binder. Welcome to the channel. Today, working on the R-170 4x4 in this one. And in the last video about the truck, I got the rear frame buttoned up to the point that it's technically finished as far as the frame is concerned. But I still need to remove these cross members on the top and basically refabricate a hoist body to fit inside the frame rail so it's concealed. To get any further on this truck now, I have to have this truck moving under its own power, which means the motor has to run. And the motor here is a 1957 BD 282. This is a 1954 R-170. This is out of a, all right, let me start over. This motor is out of a 1957 A170. This is a 1954 R-170. It's technically the same motor, but it has differences, and I'm running into some problems with it. I wouldn't say problems with it, I'll say I'm learning about the differences in those years. The 282 was called a super black diamond. There's also a 308, which was also considered a super black diamond. It's very confusing because they called these black diamonds, but then the smaller light line 6 cylinders are called black diamonds. This one, if you talk to somebody who has one of these, they'll be like, oh, it's a black diamond. But my 1940s international brain will always see this thing as a derivative of a blue diamond. So I'm like, yeah, it's a super blue diamond. Whatever, that's just details. But what I've learned about this one, this 282 from the 57 came with a 57 era pancake style bell housing, and I've swapped it to the R series bell housing. That created a problem. And the problem is the starter, because the starter for the 54 282 that was originally in this truck doesn't engage the flywheel on a 57 282. And the reason for that is the flywheel is different. The flywheel for this one is the same as a 308 of this era. When they got to 57, they started putting the same flywheel on the 282 and the 308. But at this point in 54, there was a starter that could reach the 282, and then there was a starter that could reach the 308. So basically, it's like a 2 or 3 year starter that they only used on R and S170s and 180s that had a 308. Luckily, my friend Natalie has one in Grand Junction, Colorado, and she's sending it up when she gets the time to do it. So I'm just waiting on that, but I'm not waiting on that. I have plenty to do. One of the things that I'm working on right now is the radiator. The radiator was holding several gallons of antifreeze when I emptied it out, so I'm pretty confident that the radiator's in good enough shape to hold coolant. But anything that's been on a truck that long could use a good cleaning, and there's a lot of bent up fins. Just real quick before we get to the radiator, this is I think a 2.5 inch piece of hose or something, and this whole fitting comes off here. So I took this apart, replaced this piece of hose, because it's never going to be easier than right now. And honestly, that's kind of the name of the game right now. I'm going through everything on this to get it ready to put the cab on it. But there's so many things that I can do to this truck that will make it way easier on me if I do it while the cab's off. Because it's, like I said, it's never going to be easier than it is right now. I don't foresee myself taking this cab off the truck anytime soon. I've been wrong before, but I would prefer not to take the cab off this truck anytime soon. And so doing random things like changing out the master cylinder or going through everything on the motor and linkage levers, etc., never going to be easier than right now. Okay, so the man of the hour. This is a radiator. That's the shroud. That's my coffee. That's a hose I ordered. Now that we all know each other, I have worked on this a little bit last night, straightening out these fins. it's kind of like the 35C1 I've been working on, whereas the fin rake doesn't really work on this older stuff. It just doesn't. Like, they're too stout, but at the same time they're too fragile. So the best thing is a really thin needle nose pliers. Now, they used to sell these needle nose pliers at Harbor Freight that were really thin, and I have a drawer full of them at home in Texas. So I had to stop by Harbor Freight here, and I ended up just thinning it out with a bench grinder because it wasn't quite thin enough. Anyway, I'm going to put a time-lapse video on this while I straighten out these fins with this. It's like watching paint dry, watching me do this in real time, but it's actually, I would say, uniquely satisfying to watch it on a time lapse for you and for me. I like to go back and watch it. So, yeah, here we go. All right, this is mostly done. I can still do some edges like that one. These edges I've gone through quite a bit. They're never gonna be perfect. You know, like stuff like this, that's gone through. I can go over it a little more. Stuff that's been damaged significantly, it's hard to get it completely straight, but really you just need it so that air can pass through it. Now this is the front of the radiator, which I didn't show before. And there's something really significant about this that's worth mentioning, which is an old school fix, which is right here. So the fix for this, they disconnected the tubes here and they soldered them shut here. And then up at the top here, they disconnected them, soldered them shut. So yeah, it cuts down these two tubes of cooling power, but at the same time, it's not leaking anywhere. So I'm gonna finish this up and then we'll get more into the motor and everything. All right, so it's been over a week since I recorded the first part of this video, the part that you just finished watching with the radiator and everything else. A lot of you know there's some stuff going on with my family right now, and so I only have time to work on this truck when I get a moment or two, a few hours a day at the most. But the reason I bring it up is that I've already had time to upload and edit what I recorded already. And so it occurred to me that it would probably be a pretty good idea if I took a moment and I talked about this motor in general, because the BD282 and the BD308, essentially the same motor with a different displacement, those two motors have caused untold frustration for over 70 years for people working on and ordering parts for international motors. So the prefix BD stands for Black Diamond. So it's a Black Diamond 282 is a motor model. However, the 282 and the 308 are completely different motors than the Black Diamond motors used in International's light line of trucks. The light line Black Diamonds came in 3 different displacements: the BD220, the BD240, and the BD264. This is the only time in IH's history that they use the same prefix and series of motors for two different classes of motors. So it's extremely confusing. For example, the light line black diamonds all use the same main bearing. The medium duty black diamonds all use the same main bearings, but the two don't mix. So continuing that example, if a guy went into an international parts counter and said, hey, I need main bearings 30 over for a black diamond motor, 50-50 chance you could get the wrong ones. At one point, International even went so far in their marketing as to refer to the 282 and the 308 as super black diamonds, and I believe they probably did that to alleviate confusion and frustration of the parts counter. So as long as we're at it, I just figured I'd show you a few things about how to tell one of these apart from a light line black diamond. First things first is that the serial number and model number will be stamped on the driver's side on this flat boss just below the head towards the front of the motor. A light line will be on the passenger side just above the generator, just below the head on the block towards the front. The most obvious thing will be the Medusa distributor, the distributor that sits above the valve cover. All other International motors sit down here on the side, the 6-cylinder inline sixes. Obviously with the Medusa distributor, you have the shaft that's actually external from the block. It's in this tube, but it's external from the block and goes all the way down here to the lower part of the block. You're gonna have a diagonal oil filler cap. Obviously the radiator hose goes all the way back there. These motors have PCV. This is a 57 motor, but this goes back to the 40s. And PCV wasn't mandated by the government until 1963, I believe. And so this is kind of ahead of its time. This feeds into vacuum on the manifold. And talking about vacuum, these do not have vacuum advance on the spark. This only has mechanical advance. So a light line black diamond has mechanical advance and vacuum advance, which gives it a sum total, I believe, if I remember correctly, a total of 45 degrees total advance, whereas this thing with just mechanical advance, with centrifugal weights in the bottom of the distributor, it only has 20 degrees of advance. So this thing drives like an old school truck and less like a car. As long as we're still talking about the distributor on these, medium duty and up, will spin clockwise, whereas all the light line inline six motors from the green diamond of the 40s up through the 60s spun counterclockwise. But being 6 cylinders, they all still have the same firing order, 153624. So you can still get that tattooed on your body if you really want to. One nerdy thing you can notice that if you see one of these motors sitting on a pallet and it's been stripped of all the other signifiers, you can tell by the fuel pump, because the fuel pump has this kind of offset bolt pattern, whereas a light line black diamond will have more of a symmetrical diamond shape, and these will be even straight across. The only other inline six International motor that comes to mind that has this type of mounting for a fuel pump are the green diamond flatheads from the 40s. As long as we're looking at the motor, yes, I have the radiator mounted in, shrouds on, everything's great. I gotta put clamps on that upper hose. I've got new hoses on the passenger side. I've got to deal with this heater hose outlet, but other than that, the radiator is actually good to go. The starter is on its way. It should be here by Saturday. I need to cut exhaust. I've got a lot to do still on this thing, but we're really getting there. So, as long as we're talking about stuff that I've gotten done since the last time I filmed, I've had to fabricate a handbrake linkage rod. I had to lengthen the clutch rod. I had to lengthen the brake push rod. That seems strange to me that didn't just line up with the aftermarket master cylinder, because they're supposed to be the same. But anyway, the adjustment was way out, and there was like 5 inches of free play on the brake pedal before it hit the piston. So I lengthened that, and then I fabbed up and corrected the transfer case levers. Now I replaced the Fuller transmission with another Fuller transmission, which is identical to the one I took out, except this one has overdrive. That does not affect the exterior of it at all, but this one does have a parking brake on it because it was off of a 2-wheel drive truck. Now, of course, that parking brake, it's like 4 inches wide and sticks out off the back of the transmission about 6 inches. And so that thing just decided to be a conflict for every transfer case linkage rod that was running back there. So I've had to change those all around. And it's not just as easy as bending or whatever. These are old steel with a bunch of weird contour bends. And I mean, they're cobbled together and homemade. So I just had to cut them all up and cobble them together in some type of incarnation that works. And they work now, but they don't look good. So anyway, I'm at the point now with the truck that for the motor, I'm basically waiting on the starter to fine tune everything on that. I have the master cylinder installed, but the brakes are not hooked up. I have to go through and change out the wheel cylinders. I have to run a little bit of new line, replace the hoses, a few hours work there. I have to cut up the old drive shaft from the back. The truck had a carrier bearing and 2 separate drive shafts, and both those drive shafts are too long now. So I have to take 8 inches out of one of them for the rear drive shaft now. Cool stuff. I think that's about everything with the motor. But I have something cool in the shop now, which is the hoist mechanism for the bed. I need to get this ready to go in before I can completely mount the bed. So let's get into it. This is the manufacturer's tag, Robinson Machine and Supply Company Limited, model number TT-1, serial number 1011. Now this thing was clearly made in a small factory or a workshop. And the stuff that I can tell is original, it looks good and well made. However, it has been modified since its original construction, and that is causing some conflicts with its functionality. So let me just walk through a few things of what I'm seeing and stuff I need to address. First, you may notice that it does not close completely. I have looked around it and I figured out that it is resting. See this heavy piece of angle iron that is acting as a yoke. There's clevises on the inside for these hydraulic rams to mount to. There's pins in them. So this thing is resting on the cylinders. Now, these cylinders are 2 different colors, so clearly they've been replaced, and I think both of them are non-original. I think they were added later at some point as an upgrade, because obviously it wouldn't leave the factory not being able to close completely. I've looked at this 20 ways to Sunday and crawled all over it, and I think the best fix is to move the fulcrum for this thing down about 1 inch. I think it won't really affect the structural support too much. I'll plug weld that hole shut, so that's done. Now you may be looking at this and saying, hey, why don't you just take these and kind of take either a torch or a flap wheel and clearance this and you'd be good. The problem looking at this, and it's hard to see it on camera, but I was looking underneath it, and if I clearance this and this goes down more, it puts these cylinders at an angle. It affects the geometry to a point that they're kind of almost inverted on the pin. And if you hit the hydraulics to lift the bed, instead of pushing up at an angle to get it started to start tipping the bed up, it would be pushing pretty much straight into the pin and just pushing straight back on the yoke. So I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to move them down, tilt them down a little bit, and this thing right here, it's got, I think, like 7/8 or something to come down. So I'm just gonna move it down 1 inch or so, and we should be good on that. Okay, the second thing I gotta address, these were added on afterwards, and these brackets bolt to the side of the frame of the truck. And this one up here, back really isn't too bad, but the front up here, clearly an original piece was cut out, and this whole thing was put on, and it's a bit of a cobble job. This has all gotta go because this thing has over 1/2 inch of run out where the frame is splaying out past where that yoke is. So someone added this, and these little wimpy add-ons here. This is where a hydraulic reservoir is suspended. It just mounts in here and just hangs there. And then there's a PTO drive there. I'm not for sure how that's gonna fit back in, but we'll figure it out. That's easy stuff. But this has to come out, and I have to redo it and bring it back in on both the top and bottom. So this is splaying out the top, this is splaying out the bottom, and those aren't helping anything. So that said, with the width of the frame, it is pretty much exactly 28 inches across in the back. which is fairly standard internal frame measurements, but this sat on top of the frame. However, what I'm trying to do with this thing is conceal it inside the frame of the truck. So this thing is definitely gonna be a problem because the frame of the truck on this one is just under 28 inches. So what I'll be doing is trimming the inside of the frame. And since I have the stacked frame, that's not really gonna be a problem structurally. So unfortunately, I can't use a plasma cutter for it because it's doubled on the top there. So I'm gonna probably have to use a torch, hopefully not a cutting wheel. All right, I think fourth, these bed mounting tabs. Clearly not original, clearly cut out with a torch crudely. These things are going to be a problem, so they have to go. They're sticking out from this, which is going to have to be 28 inches or under. I'm gonna cut these off. I'm gonna make nicer, cleaner ones and embed them basically into the C-channel so it's flush. Weld them in, should be just as strong, if not stronger, and look way better. Plus, no dimensional interference with the frame rails. And last, but surprisingly least important, is that these two cylinders, when I first measured up everything, were giving me a conflict with a cross member in the frame. And that cross member is the cross member that rivets to the front spring hangers on the rear axle. Now, the rear axle has two spring hangers, front and rear, obviously, on each side. And each of them is riveted to a cross member, and that's the two cross members I do not want to alter at all in the truck. It just seems like a bad idea. So this is actually a non-issue because when I take off these tabs and remount them, I'm just gonna remount them up like 3 inches, and this will be like 2.5 inches out of the way. So no problem there. Speaking of that, I took a ton of measurements on this thing. I took a ton of measurements on the frame of the truck. I went out and I took a ton of measurements on the bed, and I got a few conflicting answers that didn't really seem to shake out. After getting a few different results, getting frustrated and having to walk about 4 miles back and forth measuring stuff and trying to remember stuff, just got frustrated and I wrestled the whole bed up onto the truck. So that's pretty cool. Good test fit, good way to measure out everything of where it's gonna be exactly. And yeah, as far as a test fit, that's pretty awesome. I'm really happy with it. Lining it up with the marks in the frame that I made in the last video, and it lines up pretty much perfectly. Obviously, when I get the cab on this thing, I'm gonna have to take this thing off again so that I can get the hoist in there and I can trim out the frame and everything, but for now, I'm pretty stoked with how it looks. All right, so fast forward a few days. I went through and I took this all apart and I cleaned up everything. I still need to clean up these cylinders more. But I went through and I cleaned up everything and adjusted a bunch of hardware. It still sits like this, and it's basically how it's gonna rest. But the reason it wasn't closing is that it was binding up on some old dirty hardware that was bent and out of adjustment. So I went through and did all that, and now I don't have to drill a hole down here. So this thing closes completely, and now I just have to cut off these tabs, move them where I want them, embed them in. Oh, I'm not gonna use these. I'm not gonna reuse these. They're actually not long enough. I wanna use 4 inches. These stick out 3 inches. And if I embed them about a 1/4 inch or so, then it's gonna put the hole right on the end there. I think that makes sense, right? So move it up about 3 inches, embed it in here, and then the 4-inch guy will stick out just a little bit more. I'd say it's going pretty well. And now that I have it closed like this, I can take an accurate measurement of where it's gonna sit on the bed, if that makes sense. So that'll tell me where I can put my cross members underneath it in the frame rail. So, yeah. All right, so with the hoist bed where it's at, where I don't have to do a bunch of alteration with the actual hoist unit itself, I just have to do the dimensional corrections that I knew I had to do anyway. And the motor just about ready to work when the starter gets here on Saturday. Bed looks good, I'm happy with that. Brakes are about to be functional. At that point, when I can actually move this thing under its own power, I will be pulling it out of the shop. We're gonna get a tractor down here from the farm. We're gonna set the cab on it. Once we get the cab on it, we'll probably take the bed off of it first. The bed has to come back off of it. Once you get the cab on, I'm thinking first, these 920 beasts, those have to come off, and I'm gonna try to find 4 of the original 7.5 20s that still hold air enough to drive it on them. So I can drive that into the shop, because right now I think with the cab on it, it's too tall to fit in the door of the shop. She's a tall girl right now. So with the cab on it and these tires, I don't think it'll fit in the door. So I'm hoping it will with the old tires. Otherwise, I'm just kind of wired up outside. It's already started to snow, it's cold here. But if I can get it in the shop, which would be absolutely fantastical, then I can wire it up and weld up the cross members for the hoist bed, get that all in and happy, and then we can put the bed on it. And then I think I'm in pretty good shape with this thing. Anyway, I think this is a pretty good stopping point for the video. It's probably already 20 or 30 minutes long, and Lord knows not too many people have that long of an attention span anymore these days. So I would like to say thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. That really helps me out a lot. And I will see you in the next video.